Joanne Stabb from California, University of California, Davis, where I was on the design faculty for 34 years. I was snatched right out of graduate school from UCLA and began teaching 3 courses on the quarter system, and given about a week to prepare for 3 courses, and off I went. And I was there, as I say, 34 years in design, studio courses, and the history of costume, and rose to the grand title of senior lecturer. I have been a member of Costume Society of America for probably 37 years. Okay. I joined as a student at UCLA under Alice McCloskey and Josephine Reps, my wonderful instructors in the design program. Why did I join Costume Society? They were presenting many wonderful lecture series, and my professors, Josephine Reps and Alice McCloskey, would invite us to attend. Sometimes they were at the at that point new Los Angeles County Museum of Art, and so they were off campus, and it was a wonderful way to connect with not only other students from other institutions in the area, but also the professionals from museums, and I think there were some field trips to film studios, as I recall. So it was just like the doors were opening up, and you could see behind the scenes in our field and meet people. So it was very, very valuable. Well, the early experiences that I recall were with either design firms in the Los Angeles area, the fashion industry. Names right off the top of my head are a little vague, but we did go to manufacturers, and we also went to collections, and museum curators would give presentations, primarily Los Angeles County Museum of Art, and of course this predated their fabulous facilities that they have now, but nonetheless it was an insight into the background that made Los Angeles such a valuable fashion center. Well, obviously as a member, I've been involved for those 37 years, and my other involvement became apparent as I ran for the board as a service member, and that counted. You know, we were always seeing would this reflect in our CV, our resume, for promotion, tenure, impact. And so it was important to be active, and the positions that I held were board member, service-oriented, or giving a presentation, or hosting a program for the Costume Society. And so it just infiltrated all of my activities, it seemed, and was very important in terms of the evaluations on with those little committees that the college puts together. And they say, well, what does this mean, and how does this count? And when you have a prestigious society that you're a member of, it really helps with the evaluation of your activities. So it was very important. As things evolved, my primary field as a designer, producer of wearable art, was to begin documenting the wearable art movement, we called it, but various artists becoming interested in clothing and costume, not just as something in a play or a theater production or a film, but just for the sake of the art itself, of producing a costume, a clothing, something to wear that was artistic, didn't necessarily have to have a purpose beyond that, and seeing that development of that whole field over these years has been my primary focus. So the Costume Society kind of gave that a venue, in many cases, to present that, not only my own work, but the work of other artists and the development of that field. terrifically important to have it recognized by the Costume Society of America. Significant moments were being hired. I had been on a field trip, all university arts field trip to UC Davis. I had never visited the campus of University of California at Davis, even though I grew up in Northern California. But as a graduate student at UCLA, we got on a little bus and drove up I-5, Central Valley of California, and arrived at Davis for this all-university conference symposium that was being held spring break. This would be 1967. We thought it was so quaint. Here was a campus where most of the transportation was on bicycle, and it was a smallish campus in comparison with UCLA, and Valley was very flat, so everybody could ride their bikes, and they did. And because it was spring break, I remember we borrowed some bikes. Of course, we returned them right to the same little stall, but we borrowed some bikes and rode around and attended the various presentations by other students at UC campuses. I remember going to the film presentations, and I remember going over to the home economics building, as it was called, and seeing some student work and thinking, aha, here's a place where they are teaching clothing, fashion, costume, and of course the theater program was very strong there. So my professor, who chaperoned us, decided, well, this would be a chance to talk with other faculty members at Davis, and she arranged a couple of little chats. I didn't call them interviews, but apparently they were, and they were looking for new faculty, kind of short-term appointments at the time, but not knowing any of that, I was concentrating on my own thesis work, and so not even thinking ahead, well, what am I going to do with this? Where do I want to work? And all of a sudden, I got a job offer almost on the spot. He said, well, how soon can you finish your degree? We need somebody by the winter quarter. And this, as I said, was in this prior spring break. And I thought, well, no, I won't be ready until the following fall. No, my advisor said, come here a minute, I want to talk to you. you need to respond that you can be ready by January. And I thought, I see, all right, I will then. And so it was a little accelerated in order to meet their deadline of having some instructors for the 2 courses that I started to teach at UC Davis. So I graduated in December and was in the classroom by the 2 weeks later in January at UC Davis. So it was very fast and a little unnerving in a way to suddenly have to be standing up in front of a history of costume class and be prepared. Even though I had had history of costume courses, it really made me work very quickly, I'll put it that way. But they were just a small group of students. It wasn't terribly large at that time, and so I had time to practice. But ultimately, those courses got up into over 100 students each, and the studio courses that I was teaching were maxed out at 25 students. So it was a very, accelerated kind of growth in my experience, as I've seen in the past for other people. It was a job. My father kept saying, keep working at it, don't give up, just press on. And so given no other choice, that's what one does. But not necessarily having thought, oh, this is what I'm going to be jumping into. I had thought, oh, I have plenty of time. I want to do a real big master's thesis, a big installation of my creative work. It just had to really be accelerated, but it was worth it. How I became interested in clothing and textiles was just intuitive. As a child, I remember my mother and I would go into San Francisco and go to iMagnin, go up to the store, or the level, I think it was on the 5th floor, where they had their toy department, and buy once a year, I got a new Madame Alexander doll. And they were putting out a series of fashion dolls. These were not baby dolls. These were fashion dolls simulating some of the leading mannequins, the models in the industry at the time. And so they had clothing that simulated the current fashions, evening wear, sportswear. And this was like, well, it was Christmas, and it literally was Christmas. So I would get one of these a year. And then, of course, at home, I could, wrap little scraps of fabric around the bodies, not only having the existing manufactured costumes, but I sort of led into developing my own. Oh, here's a little piece of satin from a sewing project that my mother was doing, could wrap it around this little mannequin. And not knowing what I was doing, that was called draping, didn't know it had a title, but that's what I was doing, and just hours of entertaining myself doing that. They also put out a series of Madame Alexander dolls based on historical clothing, the Little Women series based on that story, and the film Meg. I had a little Meg doll. And so I was looking at history, I was looking at fashion, and not knowing that there was, a huge industry waiting to give me a job later. But it just was intuitive, and a lot of drawing. It was always drawing. My father would say, go put it on the kitchen wall. We had a big brick wall in the kitchen, and I'd tape it up. And so it was like encouragement from my family to continue. I don't think my dad understood that this would lead to a self-sustaining career, but he was very cognizant of the fact that this is what I like to do. I seem to be doing okay and getting better, that kind of thing. Well, first of all, the fact that there is this organization that's national and has international linkages is very important. And being sort of young and naive and not understanding the tenure process and the review, peer review, all of that, when I first got started, I thought, well, I don't know. They said put your portfolio together and we'll take care of it from there, and off it goes. So you kind of learn by doing. Nobody had really spelled that out, but it became clear what they were looking for, and the recognition from outside sources and other institutions and other professionals. And that's what the Costume Society of America can provide, this group of highly professional and well-published people who understand the criteria and look at the work in their reviews. Well, it's absolutely vital to anybody who's wanting to be in the academic world. Costume Society provides this huge repository of information and the exhibits from the past, connecting with other artists as well as curators. You see their point of view, what they're looking for, how they organize exhibits, how they document them. It's a vast repository of experience and information. And again, without the context of seeing the bigger picture, I think it's very important to learn that, the whole context of the field and how it compares to maybe chemistry. Well, how are the chemists doing, and why is that important, and who's getting that award? And then you understand the peer review system is vital. So without that, I don't think we would be progressing within the institutions that we are. The importance of the networking, very important. When I think back to my early professors and how smart they were to fold us into that whole process and introduce us to people and gain recognition in that way. When I got to Davis, understanding that, well, the chemists have their peer group, the theater people have their peer group, and so this particular group that focuses on clothing design, history, all of these aspects of fashion, provide the context in which people can get peer review and positive feedback, as well as the recognition that's vital and important.